Well, hello. My name is Al Baker. I'm an early church historian, and I'm doing this video because I've become a huge fan of The Chosen. I'm kind of a newcomer. I've only been watching it for about a month. I've watched through all the episodes that we have twice. And I love it. I think The Chosen, in my opinion, is the best presentation of the story of Jesus that I've ever seen. So it's the best presentation of the gospel I've ever seen. Now, I've liked all the other attempts in the past. You know, when I was a senior in high school back in 1977, the 6-hour epic made for TV Jesus of Nazareth appeared, and I loved it, and I watched it about 10 times because every Easter the History Channel would show it, and so I've watched it numerous times. And I really liked Mel Gibson's The Passion. I had my criticisms of it, but I really liked the scenes where Jesus was with his mother. So that leads me to The Chosen. The character development, the amazing acting, the great cinematography, the great writing, and then Jonathan Rumi's presentation of Jesus is just amazing to me. And I've become kind of an evangelist for the series. There's a lot of obvious reasons I just named for why the series has become popular. I want to give what might not be as obvious to some of you for why I think this series, The Chosen, is so important right now in 2020, 2021, in the United States especially, but maybe around the world. I want to make some comments about the literacy rate in the first century because I want to turn it back around to the literacy rate right now in the United States of America in particular. The literacy rate in the first century, we're pretty sure from papyrus discoveries that we have, from statistical information and estimations, we feel like the Roman Empire literacy rate was around 5%, just 5%. Now, admittedly, in the larger cities like Rome and Alexandria, Egypt, and even Jerusalem, the literacy rate would be higher. But if you take into account the entire empire and the rural segments, we're talking 5% literacy rate. Now, you know, most people in the ancient world could read a sign, figs, 10 figs for a shekel or a denarii or whatever. And most common people could put a grocery list together. But being literate is more about the ability to read and write something like an official letter, a legal document, or even write a short story that has proper English in it. You know, good grammar, basically good grammar. That's literacy. Now, those who could read in the ancient world tended to read to the less literate. That was kind of what was expected of you if you were literate. And thus Jesus in The Chosen, and I believe in truth, was an unusual man in Galilee that he could read. And so they let him read in the synagogue from the scroll because there's just not that many people who could read. The lack of literacy among people in the ancient world led to the use of symbols and artwork in order to depict a message visually. And that was extremely important. Teaching memorization was extremely important. So like in the series, when we have the disciples and they're all standing up and they're quoting from one of the prophets and the women are real impressed with that, it gives the illusion that they were literate. What we know about most of the disciples was that they weren't literate. They could read a sign, they could put a grocery list together, maybe they could write their name. They learned that in Hebrew school, and it was through memorization. And that scene, there's two things I want to say. Number one, it doesn't show literacy in the ancient world amongst the disciples. What it shows is an oral culture, where oral tradition is so important. You tell your stories because that's how you communicate history. And then you learn things through memory to get them in your head and into your heart. Okay. What does that mean? Why do I bring all that up? Well, we're living in an age right now where the literacy, true literacy, the ability to read and write is actually in decline. That's hard for some people to believe. But the digital age that we live in has contributed to this decline in literacy. It has led to a decrease in reading. People don't want to read. And you can't learn how to write if you don't read. You learn how to write by reading good writing. You learn how to use proper grammar by reading it in a good document. I saw this when I taught in the university. I would get papers written by university students, and I was shocked at their, what I would call, functional illiteracy. I mean, they could write, they could write, but they had no grammar skills. They had no subject-verb agreement. They didn't understand some of the basics of literacy, of writing. And they didn't know that because they don't read. And that's been confirmed to me by 3 or 4 other professors who I know at other universities, at different schools. This is why I think The Chosen is so important right now. It's the best presentation for the critical time in which we're now living, when literacy is going down. Bible literacy is certainly probably the worst that it's been in 100 years, because people don't read the Bible anymore. So the Chosen, to me, is like the best way to present the gospel material to a culture that is, quite frankly, not going to read the Gospels. Now, I've read in some comments on YouTube videos, people say, I'm going to start reading my Bible again, and that's awesome. And I think that's excellent. But people right now just don't want to read. But they're happy to watch a video. So I love The Chosen, and I'm a big promoter of it. Now, I want to make a few historical comments as a response to some comments that were made by Dallas in his interview with Brandon Potter, who plays Quintus. Both men made a few comments about the Roman Empire that just didn't sit well with me. You know, my area of expertise is the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, and so it's right in the middle of the Roman Empire. So I've done a lot of reading and study and scholarly reading of the Roman Empire. And both guys made comments that, quite frankly, just can't stand up to good historical scrutiny. Now, the reason that I want to address these things, also the disciples in The Chosen, the disciples make comments that seem to validate the things that I heard from the 2 gentlemen in the interview. And I know that these comments are somewhat representative of what Christians now think about the Roman Empire. At least that's my impression as I talk with others, with students, and with friends of mine who are well-read, and they ask me questions, and I ask them questions about what they think about the Roman Empire. And these are some generalizations that have been made about the Roman Empire, really mostly in Protestant circles, I will admit. In this interview, Dallas refers to the character Quintus, and by association, the Romans in the 1st century, as racist. And Quintus as someone who would do despicable things. And the Romans were referred to as oppressive and murderous. Now, look, Dallas is an excellent film director, and he appears to be a great writer from everything I can see. But he's not a trained historian. One need only read the Maccabees or read Josephus and the war of the Maccabees, the Maccabean War, and hear everything that the Seleucids did to the Jews before the time of Christ. 160 years before the time of Christ. The Seleucids were far more oppressive, far more demanding, far more just terrible to the Jews than the Romans ever were. I went back to the video that I'm talking about because I wanted to capture the comment that Dallas made, and I had left a fairly strongly worded comment on the page in the comment section. And I don't know if that's why, but someone in Dallas's orb, it may have been him, it may have been someone in the chosen team, edited the video, and so now his comments are not there. And I really appreciate that. I have high respect for him and for the team for removing the particular comments that I made reference to. I don't know if it was me, it doesn't matter. I just like it that they edited the video. But the video has been viewed by almost 250,000. It's been viewed almost 250,000 times. And I think the historical record needs to be understood by the chosen audience. And again, many of the Christians I know that I rub shoulders with have the same views of the Roman Empire that are expressed in this overarching way in the chosen. So here goes. Look, were the Romans tough? Yes, they were tough. But they were tough mostly when a tribe or nation resisted them. Look, they had world conquest as their goal. Yes, they did. But if they ran into a tribe or a nation and the tribe or nation surrendered and wanted to become part of the Roman Empire to avoid being annihilated, the Romans were happy to do that. And there were some stipulations that were involved, but the Romans didn't just come in and kill people just for the heck of it. Now, if you went out against them in war, they were going to be brutal. They were tough, but mostly when someone resisted them. And listen, the Jews were a contentious tribe. They had to be. Their entire culture and existence was under threat of extermination for their entire history. Comments are made about that throughout the chosen accurately. First, you had the ancient Egyptians. They were enslaved in Egypt. Then you had the Philistines. Then you had the Assyrians. The Assyrians were brutal and oppressive. Then you had the Babylonians. Then you had the Seleucids that I just mentioned, where the Maccabees came into play. And only then did you get the Romans. And the Romans were not trying to exterminate the Jews like others had wanted to do. And the Romans weren't trying to dilute them tribally by forced migration, making them, separating families, because that's what the Assyrians did. The Romans didn't do that. In fact, the Romans gave religious freedom to the Jews, not just in Judea. Empire-wide, the Romans gave the Jews religious freedom. No other group had this. You can worship your God. We have respect for your God, probably from the things they had heard from Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great had bestowed on the Jews the same honor. No other group had this privilege. However, they're being called oppressive, racists, and occupiers. The term racist is used far too quickly and far too easily in our culture. And I personally believe it's from a lack of understanding history. But when you refer to another culture that lived in a different age, more than, say, 200 years ago, to refer to that as racist is anachronistic. I mean, were the Romans racist by our standards? Yes. But so were so were the Jews. Every nation has racism, especially in the ancient world. Absolutely. So yeah, the Romans were racist by our standards. I would call it more tribalism. All cultures regard their tribe, their culture, as the best. I don't think anything's wrong with that. I think that we should appreciate our culture and our tribe. We're living in a dystopian era now in the United States where, we're hearing our own culture denigrated at every turn, and that's not healthy. Everyone should appreciate the culture that they came from. And there's nothing wrong with that, to think about the good things about your culture. The people who want to denigrate the Romans constantly, or the United States of America and our culture constantly, are just ignorant. You're ignorant of history, quite frankly. Go live on another continent, not as a wealthy American, but go live on the economy on another continent on this planet right now. What you'll learn is that every culture has what you are calling racism. I'm going to call it tribalism. And they're going to have other flaws. So, were the Romans racist? Okay, maybe, but the Jews were too. So were the Seleucids. So were the Egyptians. So I don't know. It's like, what's the point? Were the Romans murderous? Were they murderous? Well, let's think about that in the context of other historical movements. Stalin, for example, executed at least 1 million people. Another 1 million died in the gulags. Countless millions died of starvation because of his goal of exterminating anyone who didn't agree with him. The communist takeover in China led, according to some scholars, to over 40 million deaths. How about the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge? What about the carnage of Genghis Khan, who's closer to the age that we're talking about in The Chosen? Genghis Khan, now that was an oppressive, brutal, murderous tribe. Far worse than the Romans. Quintus actually provided a very fair summation of the Roman mentality in one of the episodes. It's when he's talking to Nicodemus, and he says, and I'm just going from memory, he says something like, listen, speaking of Nicodemus, we want the same thing. We want rules and we want order. We want rules and we want people to follow those rules. And he's exactly right. Basically, the Romans wanted law and order. The Romans didn't tolerate mobs and violence in the streets. They didn't tolerate rioting. And if it happened, then, as Quintus said in a different scene to Gaius, when Gaius told him we have mounted soldiers, he goes, mounted soldiers are meaningless if the people haven't seen someone trampled. Now, that's a brutal comment, but that's the Roman mentality. I don't want riots in the streets. I don't want people, mobs in the streets. That's not the Roman Empire. So Quintus expresses a brutal mentality, but that's to our soft, modern, genteel view. I mean, a lot of people who think that way need to listen to Jordan Peterson, a brilliant man, talk about the ancient world and how harsh it was, and compare it to today. We live in a soft world now. Now, admittedly, our country, the United States, is moving rapidly towards incivility, allowing mob violence in the streets. Not in my lifetime have I ever seen it, where the cops are told to stand down and people burn buildings, burn cars, and beat people up and kill people. It's amazing. And we're moving that direction. But the Roman Empire was not oppressive, not by comparing it to any other kingdoms or nations around it. Pax Romana was called the Pax Romana for a reason. You had this huge swath of land that was basically ruled by Rome, and there's no war. There's no tribal fighting allowed. It's an amazing time of peace. Now, the Roman rulers would fight each other to see who would take over, and so their soldiers would die, but the tribes didn't get impacted. The common people didn't get impacted in those wars. But Pax Romana comes at a price. And that price is everything has to be law and order. That rules supreme. And Brandon said that in the interview, and he said it quite well about the Romans. They were efficient. They wanted efficiency. They were very good at administration. And he's right. The Roman roads, the sea lanes, that was the deal. Judea, they needed the travel route of Judea to connect Egypt with the Asia Minor. It was extremely important. They needed to be able to get goods down to Egypt, to get on the shipping lanes, to go to the Roman Empire. They didn't want anything to disrupt shipping or movement of goods and services. Okay, after the Maccabean victory, again, I want to compare the Romans to the Jewish culture of the same century, the same era. After the Maccabean War, and after John Hyrcanus extended the boundaries of Israel again, the Jews oppressed all the non-Jews that lived in Judea throughout Palestine. My favorite scholar, early church history scholar, is W.H.C. Frend, right there. And I want to read to you from pages 18 to 22. He talks about this, the oppressiveness of the Jews after the Maccabean War, after they had won their independence again. I'm going to read from page 19 of Rise of Christianity. The policy of the Hasmoneans towards their conquered subjects was consistent and harsh. Loss of land or conversion to Judaism. So basically, if you didn't convert to being a Jew, they would take your land. The Romans never did that. Continue, W.H.C. Frend. Their non-Jewish inhabitants hated Jewish rule and were to welcome the coming of the Romans. So I'm okay talking about the oppressiveness of the Romans as long as you couple that by talking about the Seleucids and the Jews, because the Romans were no different. They were just bigger. They had more men. They had a bigger influence. They had a bigger empire. But they weren't any more oppressive than anybody else. And I would argue that the Jews were more oppressive. But the Jews made a treaty with Rome. Now look, I'm not trying to make the Jews look bad. Like I said, they were living under they were under constant pressure from the Syrian kingdom, what became the Seleucids, to the Ptolemies in Egypt, constantly wanting to take over Israel. So they were they're surrounded now by people who want to exterminate them. So when I say the Jews are contentious or whatever I might say that you think might be anti-Semitic, listen, I'm a Christian. I'm following a Jewish Messiah. Everything was Jewish at the beginning, just like The Chosen is showing. Now, I have a love for Israel. But I'm just saying, if we're going to make historical comments about the Romans, we need it to be balanced. But at least 3 times after the Maccabean War for independence that they won, after the Maccabean War, 3 separate occasions, the Jews made advances to the Romans as the Romans gained power. They made 3 different attempts to try to do something with the Romans, to have a treaty. They wanted the protection of Rome against Egypt and against the northern tribe that was, after the Seleucids in Syria. And I don't know all the details of it, but I do know this. I think it's in the year 69 BC. There's infighting amongst the Jews as to who is going to rule Israel. And it was almost breaking out into civil war. And both sides decided they wanted to approach Rome for a peace treaty to see if they could get Rome to side with them. And they did so. Both sides approached Rome. The Commander General Pompey comes into the scene, and he just, after hearing both sides, I just know he's the general that basically said, you know what, enough of this. These people are about to start fighting amongst themselves, so he took over Jerusalem. He invaded Jerusalem, took over the temple, but he didn't. But as soon as he did, he leaves the temple and he says, listen, you guys keep worshiping your God. All I ask is that you do a daily sacrifice for the peace of Rome and for the blessings upon Caesar. And the Jews agreed to do that. Now, with this treaty, means the Romans are now going to have soldiers in Judea. They're keeping the peace, and they're going to collect taxes. Everybody had to do that. Everybody in the Roman Empire had to do that. That's the agreement that was made. So when they're called occupiers, there's a lot of nuance to this. Did the Romans become an occupying force? Yes. But I mean, again, they gave the Jews more freedom than they gave any other tribe. Religious freedom. They let them run their own government. They let them collect their own taxes from the people. But they had soldiers there, yes. And did the Romans demand a lot of taxes? Yes, but that's empire-wide. Were they brutal when the Jews started rioting? Yes, and the Chosen does a good job of showing that. The Romans do not like a big crowd gathering because you know why? They're afraid of the Maccabees again. They hear the zealots. They know about the men who are living next to the Dead Sea Scroll. They know the feeling of a Messiah who's going to throw the Romans over, destroy the Romans. And so they don't tolerate anything that looks like a mob or a riot. But that was empire-wide. It's instructive that Messiah Jesus did not come in the vision of Daniel's Son of Man to kick the Romans out. There's no place in the Gospels where Jesus condemns the Romans, nor does he ever condemn soldiers. In fact, we get the opposite. Hey, Jesus, whose inscription? No, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus says, holds a coin. Whose inscription of this? Caesar's. Render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Render unto God what belongs to God. So in one fell swoop, he could have said, well, for right now we pay taxes, but there will come a day when we throw the Romans off. But he doesn't say that. He actually agrees that you should pay taxes. You know, what he didn't say is, that's the agreement we made. We owe taxes. And you remember when the tax collectors came to John the Baptist and asked, what should we do? You know, he's calling everybody to repent. He doesn't tell them to quit collecting taxes. He tells them, just don't take more than you're supposed to. He doesn't condemn the Romans, John the Baptist, and their taxation. The series actually, and then when the centurion comes to Jesus wanting his servant healed, Jesus says, I haven't found a man of this kind of faith in all of Israel. He could have told the soldier, the Roman soldier, take your belt off and lay it down. Of course, that would have meant his death. You cannot leave the military. If you're in the Roman army, you can't just walk away. Kind of like today, you'd be held for AWOL and put in the brig. The Chosen does a good job with this, actually. Jesus makes it very clear to Nicodemus, I'm not here to deal with the Romans. My kingdom is invisible. You cannot see it. But military presence and taxes were part of the treaty. You know, many Christians I speak with think that the Romans were oppressive and brutal because of the persecution of Christians after the resurrection of Christ. And really, well, it starts with Nero, and then there's a serious, somewhat persecution at the end of the first century. But a lot of my Christian friends and students are amazed when I tell them that persecution didn't happen every week. It didn't even happen every year. It was mostly regional. It was very rare for it to be empire-wide. And not a ton of Christians were killed. There were Christians who were tortured. There were Christians who were imprisoned. And I'm not saying that wasn't brutal. The Romans were brutal. And I'm not intending to make light of Roman persecution. For example, the outbreak in Lyon in 177 AD is hard to read about. When I've taught church history, I have read to my class from Hans Lietzmann's second volume about the persecution in Lyon. And it always moves me to tears. It's a well-written piece that Lietzmann does, but it's brutal. The Romans were brutal when they did these persecutions. But it's interesting because Eusebius only says 8 people died in Lyon. Now, there were probably hundreds that were imprisoned and hundreds that were tortured, but only 8 people were actually executed. Now, some scholars think it was more than that it could have been 20 or 30, but not 20 or 30,000, just 20 or 30. I'm not saying that's not bad, but in light of all other history, the Romans were not the worst. They didn't even come close to being the worst. As brutal as the Roman persecutions were, Eusebius lists 10 Roman persecutions from Nero to Diocletian, roughly a span of 240 years. Next is my point. W.H.C. Frend, in a book, Persecutions and the Martyrs, Christian Martyrs and Persecutions, I can't remember the exact title. The Diocletian persecution was about maybe up to 5,000 deaths. And again, I'm not trying to minimize it, but that's why I don't believe the number is higher than 20,000 for the entire Roman persecution of 240 years of Christians. When you think about it, in an 8-year period, Idi Amin, the president of Uganda, killed around 300,000 people. And they actively sought out Christians and killed them. And that was in 8 years. So in context, were the Romans bad? Yes. Were they brutal? They could be brutal. But they weren't anything like Idi Amin, Joseph Stalin, the Nazis. Okay, I need to stop. My point here is not to minimize Roman brutality, but it's to show the context of history and how Rome was not oppressive and murderous and acting as this vile occupier that is presented. Did the Jews think they were occupiers? Absolutely. The Jews hated the Romans being in there. The disciples in the Chosen are reflecting accurately the feeling the Jews had towards the Romans. But just because they felt that way didn't make it so. They quickly forgot the Seleucids, I guess, even though they're mentioned over and over again. Okay, I need to stop. It's gone long enough. My daughters would be telling me, Dad, you're ranting now. You need to stop. So I'm stopping. My next video that I put out, I want to discuss some historical things about tax collectors. The Chosen and their depiction of Matthew has been very good to me, very interesting. People have commented. Dallas commented about that there was an uproar about people didn't like the way Peter is treating Matthew, and I want to make comments about that. But I want to make some historical comments about tax collectors in the Roman Empire. I'll see you next time. Take care.